crowd, because he says there is no victory, that you're not going to die. Now, this is a fantastic belief, which he did profess, but I couldn't say he did it for a few bob. No, I wouldn't want to say that. I wouldn't trust anyone who did.
But no, the flip side of that question was, is it not possible that people of immense talent were drawn to religion because it was there and available and provided patronage, in the same way that I would suggest that very often very decent people who are concerned about the issues that you and I would feel concerned about are drawn to become Jesuit intellectuals or Josephite nuns because they can practice the politics they preach.
Well, they all used to say, I mean, at the time, here's how I argue it in the book, I have a long chapter on this. People as eminent in America as Benjamin Franklin in the late 18th century, and as eminent as John Stuart Mill in Victorian England in the mid-19th century, we definitely know from their writings, which are explicit, did not care or dare to say what they thought about religion in public. It was a matter of a few trusted friends. I think the same is probably true of David Hume, one of the great philosophers of Scotland in that period. So we do know that the intimidation was very real to them, and they would have known of people who had been persecuted to extinction for making that mistake. That's impressive, and of course should count very strongly in the anti-religion column. They're responsible for that stultification. That's the first thing. Yes, the second thing is, yes, there were people like Descartes who were sheltered at some extent in monasteries and in places of higher learning because the church had kept libraries and some other things going. It had a monopoly, after all. But look, this is all now not even quasi-relevant because we don't need any of that. I mean, any of my children can get on a search engine and become more in touch with greater knowledge than any of the church fathers ever knew existed. We don't any longer have to care about this monopoly and the exceptions to it. That's the full extent of our emancipation at present. We should be proud of it.
We're discussing a scurrilous volume called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything, by a man of faithlessness, Christopher Hitchens, and it's Late Night Live, ABC Radio, National Radio Australia, the World Wide Web, downloadable onto your pod, etc. Well, talking about the sort of pressures they were under to at least self-censor for public purposes, Richard Dawkins says that the status of atheists in America today is on a par with that of homosexuals 50 years ago. Clearly, you can run for the presidency if you're a Catholic or currently a Mormon. Can you imagine an atheist, a public atheist getting close to the White House?
Well, I'll tell you something. The proposition hasn't really been tested yet, because if you'd asked a Midwestern, averagely pious Republican voter 25 years ago, would you vote for a divorced, mediocre, aging Hollywood actor to be president? I think you would have got a fairly dusty answer. No. They hadn't seen the candidate yet, had they?
No, I guess that's right.
A person of average integrity and charm and the other skills that are required, and maybe some extra ones, who added that I am not myself a person of faith and don't attend a church, I think would be eminently electable. I know a couple of congressmen of whom actually that can be said. And so I think the proposition hasn't been tested. It's like the belief that you can't run if you're opposed to the death penalty in the United States, which I know for a certainty is not true, because two people I know, Jerry Brown of California, major state, and Mario Cuomo of New York, another major state, were both several times re-elected as governor, saying they'd never sign a death warrant. Indeed, I think they got extra credit for saying that, because people thought, for whatever reason he's doing this, it can't be just to please the crowd. Maybe he's a man of principle, and I actually do think people recognize that even in opponents. I can just tell you, Phil, that in the last few weeks, going around the South as I have been, because I've launched the book, in Dixie. I've been going around the place. But no, I insist on doing it, and issuing challenges to whoever the local preacher or professor of theology is. Very large crowds of people come and are quite friendly and sometimes enthusiastic, because until then, most of them thought They were the only atheists in the town.
How many preachers have taken you up on your challenge?
Well, call me in a couple of weeks, and I'll tell you the whole story. But I mean, we're going south to debate with Marvin Olasky, who's the guy who invented President Bush's so-called faith-based initiative. He's going to debate me in Texas. In New York, because I also, I told you, I'm opposed to pseudo-leftist piety, I'm debating with the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Right.
Who I think wouldn't have bothered to do this a year or so ago. He now knows too that in the wind is this view that just saying you're a man of faith isn't enough. So we'll see, won't we?
Christopher, a couple of months ago...
But I don't think we should cry before we're hurt. I don't think we should give away the argument before it started.
A couple of months ago, I had a guest whose name escapes me, who's been studying religion as a social phenomenon, looking at the figures of Europe versus the US and so on. And he said the fastest growing group in the US aren't the Mormons or least of all, the Muslims, most of whom, of course, are being converted in prisons. He said the biggest jump, in terms of statistics at least, is amongst the irreligious, amongst non-believers. And he says that, I think you made the point yourself, that a lot of people are just sick of it.
Well, I'd love to, if you do remember this chap's name, I'd love to hear it. I mean, I think I'm certain from experience and observation that not only have there always been a very large number of atheists and agnostics in the United States, but that the number is growing, and also that those who used to take the Enlightenment and the First Amendment and the Constitution for granted are now feeling they can't, they must come out and do something about it, which is a separate thing. No, I would say I could confirm that from experience. And I think it will be found to be true in a lot of other places in the world also. You noticed, perhaps this week, the huge demonstrations in Turkey against the Islamic parties. So people say, well, we used to just take it for granted that Turkey was a modern state, now apparently we can't. And vast crowds saying, the slogan being, no way for Sharia. That's the unifying slogan. We're not having it. We're not going to be pushed around by mullahs anymore.
Do you have
high time?
Do you have a theory on why there's been this sudden, what seems like a sudden explosion of fundamentalisms across the religious smorgasbord?
Why there would be so much of the other thing, you mean?
Why has it become such an issue? The fundamentalist
well, I used to think, I'm not completely sure I was wrong either, though it was a bit of a shallow impressionistic theory that the millennium itself, even though the millennium is not as we celebrate it or don't, of 2000 I mean, or 1999 if you prefer, isn't celebrated under that rubric by Muslims or Jews. Nonetheless, the turnover of the odometer of 2000 was having a sort of effect. I'm not sure.
The millenarian effect.
Yes, it had something to do with, and as all these religions must, because eschatology is essential to religion, and all religions have to hope, indeed pray, that this world will pass away, and to, in many cases, welcome measures that will bring that about. I mean, the Archbishop of Canterbury said, I remember this when I was younger, when the debate on nuclear weapons was at a big level in the United Kingdom. The Archbishop of Canterbury said, I don't see what the fuss was about. A nuclear exchange would only, exchange, by the way, a wonderful word for it, would only bring about the more rapid transition of millions of people to a state of bliss. The worst, he said, that's the worst it could do. And if I told you that remark and asked you to guess who said it, you'd say with Rafsanjani on a bad day, or Ahmadinejad. No, it's the Archbishop of bleeding Canterbury, mate. They have to believe it. What is the point of religion if you don't wish for this vale of tears to come to an end?
You and I were both born into societies which take their religion fairly lightly. On an Australian census, a lot of people will tick the C of E or Catholic box, but they're not exactly rushing off to church, and nor are huge numbers going to the new Pentecostal versions to wave their arms about. In England, of course, church attendance has been sliding steadily. Why the US? Why has it dug its heels in the United States?
Because for this reason, and for partly good and partly bad reasons. One, the American education system fails a lot of people and leaves them to be educated by the religious, and many of them are very primitive. But I mean, that would be a very crude way of returning the hospitality of the United States to your humble servant. The other thing is that